Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of our weekly Exploring the Parasha class with Rabbi Rebecca Schatz and Rabbi Matt Shapiro.
All right, Parashat Yitro. Some would say the best Parsha of the Torah. I disagree, but some would say that. Because we get the Ten Commandments, which is a pretty big deal. And I'm sure that Rabbi Shapiro will talk a little bit about that through his summary of the Parsha. You're not going to just mention that the Ten Commandments happen?
The Ten Commandments happen.
Okay. In the summary of the Parsha, though that's not what we're going to talk about today. The other thing that I'll just introduce this Parsha by saying, and I've shared this at Shabbat Mincha, so those of you who are there, I'm sorry that I'm repeating myself. One of the things I really love about Parshat Yitro is that we get both the Ten Commandments and we get this beginning aspect of the Parsha where Moshe's father-in-law, Yitro, is really leading him in a way to, mentoring him, I should say, in a way to become a good leader. And as we know, Yitro is not at least born a Jew. There are some commentators who believe that he may have converted, or with all the different names that we have for him, potentially at a certain point he was Jewish, but he definitely was not Jewish when mentoring Moshe. And I just find that really fascinating and quite beautiful that we need to be able to branch out of our own bubbles, whether that's our own bubble of religion or our own bubble of race or our own bubble of gender, and be able to listen to and experience and find understanding from those who are different than us, because sometimes the greatest support and the greatest insight comes from those who were least expecting it to come from. So I love that the Parsha where we receive our Ten Commandments is named after a man who really had nothing to do with our Ten Commandments. And I find that to be a really poignant aspect of this Parsha. So that is not what we're talking about, but I wanted to share that as an introduction, and now Rabbi Shapiro can...
Here is an introduction that has nothing to do with what we're going to be talking about. And
it's
now
an
for
introduction
something...
to the Parsha, which is what we're talking about.
No. And now for something completely different.
But not at all.
That was your segue. That has nothing to do with what we're going to be talking about, but I wanted to make sure to say it. Shkayach!
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. So I don't know if you guys have heard, but this Parsha has the Ten Commandments in it, but it's not what we're going to be talking about this morning. We're actually going to be talking about the first part of the Parsha, in which Yitro, Moses' father-in-law, gives them some advice, which is really beautiful for a host of reasons, and I wish I had heard more about them recently. But here we are at the beginning of Parshat Yitro. I think it's been a long week for Rabbi Schatz and I to already be this slap-happy 8 minutes in. Usually it takes at least 9 minutes for us to get here, but, what are you going to do? It's been a week. Okay. Parashat Yitro, which has the Ten Commandments in it. So we pick up, we're going to just move through the beginning of chapter 18. I will say, and we'll see it here, there is some back and forth about when the events at the beginning of the Parsha happen, and there is a strain of thought in amongst the rabbis that even though Yitro, the Parsha begins hearing about Yitro coming to find Moses, that actually happens after the Ten Commandments are given. That it actually happens after, and this is the sense that the Torah sometimes has a funky chronology, which is a technical rabbinic term, to sort of explain a couple of pieces of it. I think stories are read linearly, and I think linear narrative is what it is, and you can find other reasons for things happening the way they do. And I actually think, contra to Rabbi Schatz's transition, I actually was thinking about this piece and how it actually offers an important insight into how Moshe is able to get the Aseret Hadibrot. Well, 10 Commandments. It's not really commandments, even though it's the title. It's not really commandments. Right, Rabbi?
Correct. There's 10 statements, and really it's...
Utterances.
Utter.
Any hoodles. Meanwhile, back in Parshat Yitro. Yitro heard all that God had done for Moses. So this is the idea that like he hears something. So that's why he comes to find Moshe. He hears about this great stuff that God has done for Moses and the people of Israel, that he's taken them out of Egypt. And he takes Moses' family along with him, right? There's an interesting, we don't hear a ton about it, but there's definitely some interesting back and forth in the Torah about how Moshe might have been a heck of a prophet, but wasn't quite the family man. So we learn from this that Zipporah and Moses' two sons, Gershom and Eliezer, actually weren't with them for a chunk of time, and now he's bringing Moses' family back to him in the wilderness where the people are camped out. And he sends word on ahead. I, Yitro, your father-in-law, am coming. I'm bringing the gang. We're coming to see you, Mo. This is all rough translation. Moses goes out to meet his father-in-law. Bows low, kisses him. They say, "What's up? How you doing?" They ask after each other's welfare, and then they go into the tent. So there's sort of this sort of gradual reacquainting, right? Yitro sends word ahead, then they go out to, right? Moses goes out to meet him, and then sort of the next layer of reconnecting, the next layer of relationship, going into the tent. And going back a few prakim, it's also worth highlighting that Moses initially connected with Yitro when he was really in a low point and a very vulnerable point in his life, right? He was escaping Egypt. He just murdered someone. Not exactly a wonderful time in the life of Moshe. And Yitro took him in. And that was the context where Moses started moving into the prophet that he would become. And even if you don't have through heaven's eyes echoing in your head as you think about Moses' time with Yitro, it's clear that there was some, real grounding for what Moses' life would hold while he was living in Midian. And so from my perspective, this is sort of like reconnecting and rekindling that relationship. So in verse 8, Moses recounts to his father-in-law everything God had done, all the hardships that had befallen them on the way, if only they know what lies ahead, and how God had delivered them. And Yitro was joyful, right? Yitro rejoiced over all the kindness that God had showed Israel when he delivered them from the Egyptians. Baruch Adonai, says Yitro, blessed be God who delivered you out from Egypt. And this sort of getting into some of what Rabbi Schatz was indicating. Now I know that and it's all caps, the Lord, so the Tetragrammaton. Now I know that Adonai is greater than all gods, because I've seen what God can do by the result of what has happened. Yitro then offers a sacrifice. Aaron comes and partakes of the meal. So there's, some ritual associated with this exalting and with this ritual reconnection. Okay. So now getting more into the episode that we're going to be looking at more closely. So the next day, after they've had this moment and this exaltation and the ritual marking of that experience, Moses is out doing his thing. He's judging, right? Lishpot etam. Moses is out as a judge amongst the people. And there's a long line of people to see Moses, right? You got 600,000 cranky Israelites, and everybody's got a bone to pick, and Moses is the guy in charge, so everybody's lining up to get their disputes resolved by Moshe. And Yitro sees this, and how much he had to do for the people, and Yitro says to Moshe, Maha davar aseh asher ata oseh? What are you doing? Why are you sitting all alone and the people are coming before you from morning until evening? Why are you doing this way? And Moses responds to his father-in-law, Ki yavo elai ha'am lidrosh Elohim, because the people are coming to me to sort of inquire of God, right? Drash, to have God's word, God's will, God's understanding of the situation drashed out for them. Verse 16, and when they have a dispute, it comes before me, right? I'm the leader, so the dispute comes to me. And I am the one who decides between each person and his fellow, and I make known the laws and the teachings of God. I'm the one who's sort of laying all that out. There's a one-man show, as it were. Now we're going to hear the rebuttal, and these are the verses that we're going to focus in more on the rest of our time. So chapter 18, verses 17 and 18. Vayomer choten Moshe elav, Moses' father-in-law says to him, Lo tov hadavar. That's not good. This thing that you're doing is not good. The thing you're doing, not a good thing. Novol tibol gam ata gam ha'am hazeh asher imcha. You will, and these words are interesting and offer what to drash on. They're it's a very uncommon word in the Torah. I don't know if Rabbi Schatz is going to talk about that at all, but these beginning words of verse 8, she is not. She is reluctantly shaking her head. She wishes she was, but she's not. She doesn't care. These are uncommon words in the Torah, but when words are repeated, it's sort of placing emphasis on it. You will surely be worn out. You will surely wear yourself out, you and the people that are with you. Ki kaved mincha hadavar. For this thing that you're doing, it's too heavy for you. It's too much. Lo tuchal asohu levadecha. You can't do it alone. It's too much, Moses, for you to be taking this on your own. So to offer sort of like my half thought, my mini framing for this before we move into Kushiot, there is definitely what to take away from here in terms of like leadership lessons, right? I certainly consider myself very lucky, and I think Rabbi Schatz does too, that we are part of a team here at Temple Beth Am. It would be very heavy to carry all of Temple Beth Am by oneself, and it's nice to have a team of folks. I see colleagues who are solo rabbis of shuls, and God bless them. That seems like a lot, right? I am very grateful to work as a part of a team, and it's important.
No, I totally agree. I would just say, having come from a shul that was a solo pulpit shul until I arrived, I think that you find partnership in different ways, right? It's not a team of clergy people or of staff people who are currently listening to me because I forgot to shut my door, but people who, in the community who then step up in different ways, not to say they don't hear, but step up in different ways because those jobs are no longer staff, they are volunteer.
There are different types of support as a leader, and wherever you find it, it's not good to do it by yourself. I'll say I don't think this is just a leadership lesson. I think there's also a lot in here in thinking about what are the burdens that we carry, what are the ways that we relate to the world, when are the times that we take too much on ourselves, when and how do we ask for help, where and how do we find support from others, what's challenging about that, what are the healthy ways of doing that, and also, looking at the way Yitro approaches the situation. The flip side of that is when we give advice, what's a good way of giving advice in a way that it can actually be heard instead of it just being heard as kind of a tisk, you're not doing this right. So I think there's a lot in there. I think, yes, sort of leadership lessons, but I also think in terms of how we relate to other people and its impact on us and others, I think there's some interesting fodder for exploration. Transition over to Rabbi Schatz.
Oh. Great. Let's do some Kushiot. Renee.
So my first thing actually was the emotional component of it, the thought of Yitro saying what you're doing is not right. It's very critical, and also I don't get the sense that his only thing that he thinks he's doing that's not right is that he's doing it alone. I wonder if there's not more to it than the fact that he's doing it alone, but the fact of the role that he's the son-in-law, and why wasn't Yitro a part of that leadership role? I don't know. I don't think it is totally a thing of him being concerned about Moshe wearing himself out. It doesn't sound like that to me.
But you think that he believes he should have been involved? He himself?
I think he should have been involved. And I think, like I said, the way that he worded it saying the first comment that he has to him, rather than coming from a more empathic, if he's really concerned about Moshe, you would think he would be more empathic in his initial comment. And rather than being empathic, his comment was, no, what you're doing is not right.
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. I've never thought about the inward-facing aspect of his comment, potentially. That was an interesting question. Elon.
So it's kind of clear to me what is meant by the thing you are doing is not right. You will surely wear yourself out.
Yeah.
What I don't understand, and these people as well, what is meant by that? How does this wear these people out? So that's the thing that I'm curious as to what everyone's interpretation of that is.
Great. I definitely have a little bit on that, so we'll get back to it. I'm sure Rabbi Shapiro also does.
Samesies.
What did you say?
I said samesies.
Oh, but yeah, a very interesting, if for no other reason than just the syntax of that is quite interesting, that we would be, or that he, I should say, would be concerned that it's too heavy for Moshe, but then also, or I guess I'll use the words that are here, that you would surely wear yourself out, and then they add on the people. Like, is it one before the other? Is it that we're concerned about you then wearing the people out based on you being worn out? Is it that if you are burnt out, everybody else is going to suffer, right? So there are definitely commentaries on that, and we'll get to them, but a great question. Joanna.
So the lo tov is popping out at me, and I know the word tov occurs, throughout the Bible, but like, where do we hear the expression lo tov?
Right.
And it takes me back to Breshit, lo tov hayot adam levado.
You and Rabbi Shapiro are 100% on the same page, so we should just put the two of you in a breakout room, and I can teach the rest of the class. That's great.
So should I just keip quiet? And not still
no. You can keep going. You can keep going. No, keep going. So it's very interesting. The birth of humankind, the birth of peoplehood, that coming together here, and the whole concept of that comes up in Genesis of Ezer Kenegdo. A helpmate that corresponds, and I'm also looking at like the idea of kaved mimcha, and is it that it will be too heavy, like for you, Moshe, or from you? Will there be a heaviness from you doing this all by yourself on all the people? Right.
And it takes me a little bit to I think Renee maybe possibly was starting to hint at this. This idea, like, even if Moshe could do it all by himself, is that a good model for leadership? Don't you want to be cultivating leadership, also bringing people in with you, and not being, so on top of, running things from all the way up here, and the people are all the way down here? What is the model that will lead to the most fruition, will lead to the most buy-in from the people, will lead to the most engagement from the people?
Yeah. Great. I'm not even going to comment, because I know that Rabbi Shapiro has really everything to say about that comment. So
you already said it. I mean, I'm very excited that Joanna and I are on the same page, because as I put in the chat, exactly the same thing resonated with me when I read that verse. And Joanna actually, I think, probably said it better than I would. So, shkoyach.
That's why I told her to keep talking. All right, Paula and then Nancy.
Hi.
Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome back to LA.
I know. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of. So the thing that struck me, I'm sorry, my postman is here. The thing that struck me repeatedly was identifying this relationship between that it's constantly repeating father-in-law, father-in-law,
Mm-hmm.
father-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, and that, and then earlier on that he came back with Sipporah and her two sons. It didn't say his two sons or your two sons.
Yeah.
It said her 2 sons. So that all this sort of relationship through the daughter with the kids, he's also a grandfather.
Yeah.
But it just was that constant repetition. What does that mean? That it's that reminding Moses, Moshe of this, relationship through his wife. And maybe it's his yichus, it's his, gravitas. Like, I'm reminding you of this because I have some insight, I have some wisdom to share with you. And you might not expect that from me or respect that from me. But given our relationship, I need you to at least hear me out. Yeah.
Oh, Rabbi Shapiro just unmuted. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say I love that. I mean, I think I'll expand that even further and just highlight. I don't think we hear Moshe and Zipporah talk to each other at all in the Torah.
Yeah.
So, Paula, you're emphasizing like that particular relationship. I think you're exactly right to sort of highlight the interesting dynamics there, and that had never really occurred to me before. So I think that's also really interesting.
I just want to comment on the father-in-law piece. I think that there are obviously different ways of interacting in partnership with your partner's family. And I don't have a partner, so I can't speak to my own experience, but I can speak to my parents' experience, growing up in that household. And one of the things that I noticed very early on as a kid was that my parents call each other's parents. It's going to sound confusing as a sentence, but my mom calls my dad's parents mom and dad, just like my dad calls my mom's parents mom and dad. And as a little kid, that was confusing because you don't always know, like, okay, what parents go with which parent of yours. But when we were older, our parents explained to us that even in the moments where it would be easiest to not necessarily associate with the way that they're asking you to parent, or the, discussions that they're having with you around how you're running your household, or the way that you are spending your money, or how many kids you have, or any of those kinds of things that would be potentially easier to hear from your own relative than from your partner's relative, that calling them mom and dad always helped remind them that these two are their parents, and that they were able to have that relationship even when it was challenging. So whenever I hear of Yitro in this way, it's always just a sweet remander. And I started off by saying, I know this isn't the case for everybody, but in my own life, it's always just a sweet reminder for me that your machatanam, right? Your parents-in-law can also act for you as parents for whatever reason, but can also act for you as parents if that's the type of relationship that you're able to have with them, which Moshe clearly has, which is so special.
Which is particularly poignant given the complicated dynamics of Moshe's own parental history.
So true. So true. Yeah. Nancy.
So kind of in a different direction, this past Sunday, Marlise and I attended a 1LA training where the readings were this Parsha.
Oh.
And a section and a chapter, much more difficult, of the Brothers Karamazov about the Grand Inquisitor, and really used both of the, I know, sounds bizarre, right? Yeah. And used both of these together.
I'm really excited. Whatever the next two sentences are, I'm really excited to hear them.
Well, next time you'll come. So.
Great. Putting it out there. Everybody come hang out with Nancy at 1LA.
Well played, Nancy. That was well played.
Both of these really talking about this whole, do you do it all? Which is authoritarianism, right? With like, do you want someone to tell you what to do all the time?
Yeah.
Or do you really want to be part and engage and learn to be, an impressive public person, which is about the people? Right. And it was kind of fascinating because both this Parsha and that whole section, maybe the whole book, I don't know, of the Brothers Karamazov is about, in a lot of ways it's easier to have one person tell you what to do all the time. But is that really what, I mean, including right now in this pandemic, but is that really, really what you want? And so the importance of all of us, the learning and spreading the training and all of that so that we all learn how to participate. So it was interesting. It was really about, being the people and being hard on the people.
Yeah. I love that goes back a little bit to, as an example, to Elon's question, right? Of like, how is this not just hard on Moshe, but how is this also wearing out to the people as well? And how do we make sure that the leadership that Moshe puts in front of his community is not going to burden him or the people? So thank you for that modern day example. Okay. Denise, and then Mike, and then Joanna. And then I think we're going to get to some commentaries. Rabbi Shapiro, can you take this screen? I think we've seen these verses. Okay, thanks.
Usually I take it off and you tell me to put the verses back on.
I know, but so I can't see people.
I am but a humble servant.
Oh, thank you. Oh, good. That's good to know.
Here at the whims of, I don't know where to go from that.
Rabbi Schatz is my name. Okay, Denise.
So I feel like it's a little bit problematic and kind of ironic the way Yitro approaches it, because he comes in and he just tells Moshe, hey, you're doing it wrong and it's too heavy and the people and all this stuff. If it was me, I'd be very irritated. No matter, even if it was someone I was really close with and had a great relationship with. And, you just feel like, well, wouldn't it have been better for Yitro to say, hey, how's this going to work? Or what are you feeling about this? Or why did you do it this way? Or just engage him in some kind of dialogue or exploration or something,
Right.
And then, and to be commenting about leadership and doing it in such an obnoxious and intrusive way, it's like, why would anyone even be open to his input when he's presenting it that way? And I think a lot of times, in all kinds of situations, people present things and then the reaction is to the presentation even more than to whatever they're saying.
Great. I think that speaks to a lot of the ways in which we try to lead, today, right? We try to make sure that we're not just mandating certain things that people should do because it works for us or because we've seen it work elsewhere, but have a dialogue about, I noticed that you did this and I'm just wondering, actually, I'll use a personal example that I am sure Rabbi Klickfeld will be okay with me sharing. 2 Shabbatot ago, I was doing a bar mitzvah. I was doing bar mitzvah, and I don't remember which. And Rabbi Klickfeld happened to be there, not officiating. I was officiating. He was in the congregation, and we got to the prayer for the country. And I guess I really don't remember, but I guess I didn't tell people to stand up. Now, it's not my usual thing. I think I just forgot. So the next day, 2 days later in our meeting, he said to me, Rebecca, did you intentionally not have people stand up for the prayer for the country? And I said, I don't think so. I think I probably was just going from one thing to the next and thought I had said it or just forgot to say it, or it was not an intentional thing. And his response, and this is what, is good from a leader and from a mentor. His response was, okay, it would have been okay if you had intentionality around that. I just would have wanted to talk about how we could be on the same page, right? Which is a beautiful way of saying that's not my practice. We are the rabbis of Temple Beth Am. We should probably be on the same page about what that looks like to our community. But he wasn't saying to me, you must do it, because I would have heard that very differently, right? So I think what you're speaking to, Denise, is that even though Yitro is trying to do something so beautiful for Moshe, was there another way to get to the outcome and make it a partnership and a conversation of learning, as opposed to this is what works better and I see you not doing that. Mike, you put your hand down. Is that intentional?
Yes, because mainly the things that I wanted to say were covered by Denise and you, because you spoke about how your family worked, and Denise talked about how he just came on so strong, and I was thinking that, you really have to know your children or your son-in-law, in this case, to know like his response, or you would think, because to some people you could do it this way, but to others it would be such an insult that it would get you nowhere. It's sort of like
totally.
My wife is always constantly saying, if you say this to Zach or Josh, they're just going to clamp down, and we're not going to get anywhere with this. So I mean, I think the kushya I would bring out is well, how did he know he could? The idea is fine,
Beautiful.
But how do we know the way he was saying it would get a response?
Right. You have to have a certain level of relationship already that we don't necessarily hear the ins and outs of in the Torah, that Yitro and Moshe must have had for it to be a successful piece of advice rather than unsuccessful or feel kind of attacking in a certain way. Okay. Rebecca, Joanna, I know I called on you next, but let me call on the people who haven't spoken first, and then we'll go back to you. So Rebecca, Marlise, and then Joanna, and then Elon. Rabbi Shapiro, you can leave. I think we're just taking people's kushiyot today. Okay, go ahead.
I wanted to bring up two things. One is related to what Paula said, and I thought she was going in this direction, and then she went sort of to another direction. But it might be that Yitro is bringing this up in order to fix or to improve the family life of his daughter.
Yeah.
So it might be that, he's being introduced again as the father-in-law in order to emphasize the fact that he's saying this is not good, not just for you, but, for your whole family. So that, I know that it doesn't mention that in any way, but that's sort of where my mind went after hearing Paula. The other thing I wanted to bring up is going back to the words that Rabbi Shapiro said, don't show up much. Navol Tibor. And as a speaker of modern Hebrew, to me, those words are, you will wilt, not really that you'll be tired or worn out. And then I know that the word ayet is used. This is not the only way to discuss being tired, exhausted. And I kind of like that he used these words like the wilting of a plant. You just won't have enough nourishment if you're constantly busy dealing with all the people.
Yeah. Great. I think we're going to talk a lot about the second piece of your statement in just a few minutes. That there is something to be said. I was actually talking to Rabbi Sarah Baruch, Rabbi Matt Shapiro's wife, yesterday about this a little bit. That part of the way in which leaders, especially during COVID, have recognized that they need to keep going is first by taking care of that which they need to nourish them, right? That there needs to be some aspect of like inward recognition of how you aren't going to burn out just as a human before you even think about how you're not going to burn out as a working professional. So yeah, I think we're gonna get back to that very, very shortly. Marlise and Gary.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So just a comment and question. One, just back to the training that Nancy was talking about. Another point made was that in doing it all himself, Moses wasn't really, people were kind of standing around waiting for him, and he wasn't respecting, their dignity. And I guess probably not respecting their time either. So.
Oh, you froze.
In dignity, maintaining your dignity. If this is, Rebecca might have been saying this, I couldn't hear that well, but my question, I was wondering, why Moses was separated from his family, why they came with Yitro and weren't together.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if there's textual answer for it. Do you know, Rabbi Shapiro? I think it might have just had to do with the way that they left Egypt, but I don't know if there's textual basis for that. I'm not remembering it if there is. Do you have an idea, Rabbi Shapiro? No, I can't see your face, so I can't tell if you're actually speaking. Okay, great. But we can definitely look and see, Marlies. Okay, Joanna, and then Elon.
Perfect timing. So interestingly, in Rabbi Klickfeld's Wednesday Rashi class, we are on chapter 4, which is the scene we're up to exactly right now is Moses being commanded by God to, get out of Yitro's house and get back to Egypt, time to go save the people. And there's a very confusing section in chapter 4 where seemingly Moses puts his wife and kid on the horse and they're leaving together. But it's not entirely clear that they end up back in Egypt together. And there's a back and forth in the commentaries there on that. So that's really interesting in light of what we're reading now, because it looks like at some point Moses and Zipporah in fact separated, because Zipporah is back with Yitro. Moses separates, and now they're brought together in this scene. And it strikes me, looking back all the way at the beginning of chapter 18, as I started to put this thought together, 3 times we are told that Yitro was with Zipporah and her sons, bringing them to Moshe. Why do we need to hear that 3 times? And then we get to our, this whole thing also that Rebecca was bringing up about what happened in the family dynamic there, because it looked like they were leaving together, and clearly in this scene they're not. So there's a whole, and then fast forward to the famous midrash on the Tzara'at episode with Miriam, and what did they speak out against? And there's a famous midrash there that Miriam spoke to Moses about the fact that he wasn't paying enough attention to his wife and that he had stopped having marital relationship with his wife. So yes, that's midrash, but there seems to be this undercurrent of what is happening in this family dynamic as Moses rises in a leadership role. And now all of a sudden that Lo Tov is doubly interesting, because I wonder if, everyone knows that in-laws should not get involved in the marital affairs of their children. And if now there's a double entendre of that Lo Tov about not only Moses' relationship vis-a-vis the people, but Moses' relationship vis-a-vis Zipporah.
Very interesting. Thank you for bringing all of that. Elon.
Yeah, I want to speak in defense of Jethro or Yitro, which... So I spent the bulk of my career working on a trading floor, and there were times, frequently, where you don't have the time to say, "Hey, have you thought about this?" Right? I'm going to give Yitro the benefit of the doubt and believe that he thought that this was an imminent issue, and he didn't have the time to kind of butter him up and soften it up. And there's no evidence, by the way, that Moses took offense to this. I think he was perfectly fine. So I think it's maybe not advisable for us to put our modern sensibilities of, for lack of a better term, a touchy-feely approach to what happened in 3,000 years ago.
Great, yeah. Thank you for bringing that, and I'm sure that there are ways in which reading it exactly that way. To be honest, that is the way that I've read it in the past, is that Moshe seems to be totally fine with it, whether or not it was, the correct way or a very strong way. But Moshe seems to be totally fine with it. And whether it's based on just the way in which you need to talk to someone in the moment or that which was kind of created via relationship, we'll never know. But yeah, thank you for bringing that. Okay, Rabbi Matthew Shapiro, your turn.
Oh, thanks, Rabbi Schatz.
You're so welcome.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna, Elon, to your point as well, I would say, I appreciated, Mike, what you said about the different people respond to different things in different ways, which seems like a very obvious statement. But in terms of how people need to give and receive feedback, right, the way that I might need to hear something is very different than the way that you might, right? And not only to Rabbi Schatz's point that it didn't seem like Moses had a problem with it. I mean, we stopped before we see what happens. Moses implements exactly what Yitro says, right? So whatever he said and however he says it, it works, right? It resonates. And I would also push back, I think, a little bit on how Yitro like comes right at him. He actually, right, we went through the verses a little bit beforehand in terms of this. He does at least ask, right? He asks, why are you doing it this way? And Moses gives him an answer, right? There's at least one back and forth. It's not that he sees him doing something and he immediately goes into, hey, don't do that, right? There is even one quick instance of back and forth there. So, and I also think that depending on how we each prefer to give and receive feedback, that in turn informs how we read those verses, right? If you're someone who's okay with more direct feedback, this may be like, oh, great, good job, Yitro. And if you're someone who doesn't like that as much, you might be like, Yitro, whoa, coming in a bit hot there, right? Because I think each one of us is different in that regard, So to that point as well, I think it also speaks to the role of relationship here. And it actually seems like, however you might feel about this method of feedback, it works, right? And so it does seem like there is a real relationship there, which in turn informs sort of the very guidance that Yitro is giving Moshe, right? That there can be something else kind of built here in terms of how you think about how you're relating to these people, right? That it doesn't just have to be one person and everyone else, that there can be more differentiated leadership in terms of the roles that people hold, because that also creates different types of relationship, which are really valuable here. I want to say one more piece about that, and then I actually want to go back to a question, Ilan, that you asked a while back, which is the piece about the role of relationship is also, I mean, Nancy, you were, after scolding me, talking about this idea of like a more authoritarian model as opposed to a more democratic model. The other thing that popped into my head, do folks know Erich Fromm, right? Escape from Freedom, right? The 20th century psychiatrist and thinker who escaped Nazi Germany, right? And who had this idea that actually not everybody wants autonomy. And there are a lot of ways in which we actually flee from that. And that the paradox of choice, it can actually be really overwhelming. And sometimes people actually really want to be told what to do, and it can feel burdensome to have choice.
That's what happened in last week's Parsha with the slave leaving Egypt. And
you could say that's golden calf. You can say that's any number of things, right? Having agency can be scary, particularly for people who have just left slavery. And so I think it's interesting to have that, right? What does it mean for Moshe as a leader to embrace vulnerability? What does that do to the people? How does that open them up? And then also the thing that occurred to me on that is, without getting too into like the formal wordplay of it, that the words were engraved on the tablet, that they were charut on the luchot, and then there's a rabbinic sense that it was cherut on the luchot, that there was freedom written on the tablet. So moving into Sinai, this idea of what is freedom, what is authority, who exercises authority, where is freedom found, is it found in choice, is it found in having guidelines, who gets to dictate that? I think there's a lot in there, and thinking about that for ourselves, right? What are the boundaries that we need to set up for ourselves so that we can feel free? Where do we have freedom, and how do we then establish boundaries for ourselves to feel safe within that freedom? Those are two sides of the same coin, I think. I was just talking about this with somebody the other day. There is obviously, I think people can can probably see this in me and how I interact with my esteemed colleague. There are ways in which I really enjoy pushing boundaries. Shocking. I don't think anyone who is listening to this or on this class. But in order for me to feel safe doing that, I need to know that there are boundaries, right? And so I have a workplace where there are clear boundaries, which means that I can have fun poking at people like Rabbi Rebecca Bartholomew Schatz, because I know like that I can, right? Because there is that container, there is that boundaried space, which then offers some freedom within that. So I think there's a lot in that. Elon, going back to your question about the specific language, and I will pull it back up since it's been a while since we were exploring this specific piece, right? Because Elon, you were asking about Gam ata, gam ha'am hazeh asher imcha, right? What does it mean that you're going to wear yourself out and these people are going to be worn out too? The Orach Chaim explores the language of that a little bit. He says a couple of pieces, but he speaks to the reciprocity there in terms of what that wearying is, right? That Moshe, you are, and he also speaks to the doubling of that Novol Tibol, that you're going to get a little worn out and then you're going to get really worn out, right? That you're initially going to get kind of worn out by this, and then over time, you're really going to wear yourself down. And when you really wear yourself down, yes, you, gam ata, will be impacted by that. Gam ha'am hazeh. And also the people are going to suffer from that because you're so worn out. Right. So again, sort of holding that there's a leadership lesson in that in terms of, what are the things that we need to do to take care of ourselves. And there's also just a general relational piece to that. Right. If I'm not taking care of myself, I can't show up meaningfully and appropriately for the people with whom I'm in relationship. Right. If I'm wiped out, worn out, can't have a tough time dragging myself out of bed in the morning, I can't be the kind of husband that I try to be. I can't be the kind of father that I try to be. I can't be the kind of colleague or teacher that I want to be because I'm not taking care of myself. And so I think the Orach Chaim's, sort of reading into the specific way that the beginning of verse 18 is laid out. I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot in that.
Can I just add one thing on that?
You can add two things.
Oh, wow. So generous. So Chizkuni talks to that phrase. It's so funny. You said, do you have anything on this phrase? And I said, no. And he's speaking to the phrase Navol Tibol, but I don't hear the comment as really around that. So I guess I do have something on that phrase, but what Chizkuni says is that the word is similar to the word for to be confused in Hebrew, because it uses a similar kind of, the fact that it's a little bit onomatopoeic, that it sounds like you are confusing yourself, that you will, you see the association to then those two words together. And so what Chizkuni goes on to say is that Yitro felt that Moshe would confuse the people because each one would shout that he wanted to be heard next, that a person wanted to be heard next. And as a result, Moshe would become confused. And this would be due to his inability to hear each person correctly. And I think that actually speaks, this is why I thought that it was to the later part of the verse, which Elon asked the question about, that this wearing out seems to be that if, as Rabbi Shapiro just indicated, if you aren't present, then all the people are actually going to get bad advice or get bad leadership and then not be able to move forward in the way that they should be. So in terms of, the trickle down effect from leadership of like top down, if the leader at the top is not a healthy figure, for a whole host of reasons, and I'm sure when I just said healthy figure, you all thought of leaders that aren't, then those underneath who are under that type of leadership are much more confused, have less boundaries, don't know which way is up because they're not getting that from their leader. So it is interesting to me that Chizkuni is connecting that to the Navel Tibol piece, because to me it actually answers Elon's question much more so of the way in which the people will also be worn out, quite literally wrung dry, I should say, so that they just don't have anything left to give or care about. And that actually, I think, is maybe even more important, that if a leader loses their ability to show care and connection and boundaries, that the community just starts to no longer care, and no longer want to be connected to that which they previously were associated with. The only other piece that I wanted to share was from Sforno, and he says, did you bring the Sforno piece also, Rabbi Shapiro? No. Okay. This idea of you can't do everything alone. And what he points to is you can't listen to all the problems and subsequently be able to then give personal attention to those specific problems, right? If every single the bat mitzvah student happens to be talking about this verse this Shabbat, and one of the things that I use as an example with her was, if all congregants only came to Rabbi Kligfeld, he wouldn't be able to give everybody the attention that each single person who is, for whatever reason, coming for pastoral care deserves. Right? That is why, as Rabbi Shapiro mentioned earlier in the class, that is why we're so blessed to have such a big team, because you can feel like you have access in a way that you might not if there was only one person to go to. And so with Moshe, there is this really important lesson for him to learn, that sure, he might have the answers, but the fact that he's the only one giving them is actually really destructive to the ability to be clear-headed and listen to the person who's in front of you. Last thing I'll say, and then I'll push it back to Rabbi Shapiro. At the beginning of COVID, I remember we were all trying to figure out how to do everything on Zoom. And just like that Zoom fatigue that everybody talked about, and you had all these meetings, and how do you look at a screen for 12 hours a day, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that one of the things that I'll speak for myself, but as a team, we spoke a lot about, is the emotional exhaustion of sitting with somebody and looking at their face for an hour or however long the meeting is, clicking off your screen and going to the next person who needed that exact attention, looking at a screen for an hour to just hear them and listen to them. And there is some, I mean, we all got used to it over time, but in the beginning, I remember that by the end of the day, I felt like I needed to recharge before I could meet with someone really clear-headed to give them the same advice that I might have given them earlier on in the morning. So we all need either people or different ways of recharging our batteries to be able to do this. And again, back to the point that Elon made, I think that if the leader is having a hard time with this, the constituents underneath the community ends up bearing a lot of that burden. Rabbi Shapiro gets to do the bow because he's been so good at it in the past few weeks.
Hold on.
Oh.
Where's the bow? Oh, here we go. There we go.
No. What's about to happen?
You
froze.
There we go. Does that work?
No.
Wait.
You should okay.
No, my computer's just so slow.
Yeah, I can tell.
There we go. Ta-da! Okay. What if that was all I did? For the people who are listening to the podcast, I just brilliantly used the Zoom filter to make it look like there's a bow on my head.
Brilliant is a strong word.
What?
Brilliant is a strong word.
And an accurate one.
Yeah.
It was funny. Just for the folks who are listening, good. I was going to cite some of the what was happening in the chat, in which Elon promptly put, in honor of this week's Parsha, I'm going to listen to Aqualung after this class. Jethro Tull, shout out for the win. But there's also a lot happening in the chat with people talking about the different ways in which freedom and boundaries interplay in society, in our relationships, and it just seems like that's pinging for folks, and I just want to sort of name that out a little bit more. The one other piece I'll offer up, I have promised and committed and just really been enjoying flipping through Dr. Aviva Zornberg's stuff more as we've been moving through this book. And a point that she highlighted is that the way in which this episode is actually a prerequisite for the revelation at Sinai, that the language of heaviness is used, and that there's something about then if the heaviness is released, it actually makes it possible for Moshe to be open enough to receive revelation. And I think that that's a really beautiful point. And Joanna, going to the keenly attuned, because you and I are on the same page today, sense of kaved mimcha, like maybe it's not just that it's heavy for you, but that there's a heaviness emanating from you, that if the heaviness is lifted from him, and therefore then the heaviness is also hopefully lifted from the people as well, because we know it's not just Moshe, but all of us were there at Sinai, that when the heaviness is lifted, it makes it possible for all of us to be there. So it had never occurred to me to think about sort of that 1-2 sort of through line of things before, but I think it's a really interesting way of thinking about it, right? That we each need to be sort of open to receive the revelation that we need to hear, and that there's some internal housekeeping that needs to happen before we can do that, right? That we need to make sure that we're clearing out the heaviness that we carry around with us, that we're experiencing as best as we can, and part of that is like letting go of control, right? Letting go of doing things all by ourselves, making sure that we're taking care of ourselves, and that's not easy, and that it does sometimes take the insight of the outsider to be able to point us in that direction, and that hopefully that advice and the guidance has been given in a way that we can really hear it, and that if and when it is, and that if and when we're able to really do that work, then that's what opens us up to hear what we need to hear to move forward. So I had never really thought about it in that way before, and I think that that's a nice preparatory thought for us as we head into Parashat Yitro, which, and I don't know if we were clear about this at the beginning of class, contains the 10 Commandments. So with that, a blessed Sabbath to all, and to all a good night.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I just want to make sure that people know that on Shabbat we will have library minyan, and there's also a bat mitzvah where we're going to be talking about these verses. Rabbi Klegfeld and Rabbi Shapiro will also be leading I don't know if you're calling it something special, but like a processing, meditative.
A gathering in response of what happened last Shabbat.
There you go. So that'll be both on Zoom and on the roof here at Beth Am. So if you're interested in... Yeah. So if you're interested in coming to that, it's at 10 a.m. and you can either go to that and services, or you could just go to that, or you could just go to services and enjoy that later. Whatever is good for you. Just wanted you to know there was that extra option this Shabbat. So Shabbat Shalom. Hope to see you soon, and have a great week.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom, folks.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.